Hello, everybody. Good to be with you again. My name is Michael Millerman. MillermanSchool.com is my online university. Well, Martin Heidegger, Basic Concepts. I really like this short writing of Heidegger's, comparatively short, if you compare it with Being in Time or Contributions to Philosophy of the Event or other brilliant works of Heidegger's like, where is it? Parmenides, right there, that blurry book above my finger. That's Heidegger's Parmenides lectures. Well, this Basic Concepts is quite nice, very good. And for a long time, I've wanted to teach it and kind of walk through the introduction. I've been putting it off, but I thought, let's just do it. So my plan for this live stream is as follows. Heidegger's Basic Concepts, introduction, the internal connection between ground, being, and inception. I want to walk you through it. So I'm going to read it, comment, explain, clarify, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, hopefully you get some value out of this. So Heidegger, as he sometimes does, begins with an elucidation of the title of the lecture. What are basic concepts? What are we even talking about here? Basic concepts are ground concepts. Basic concepts, he says, GrundBegriffe, of what? This is going to be interesting, okay? All of the parts of Heidegger that are hard to understand, I'm going to do my best to explain clearly for you as we go through. The title of this lecture does not say what basic concepts are. So it uses the word without saying what they are. Hence, what is supposed to be grasped by these concepts remains unclear. Concepts are said to be representations in which we bring before ourselves an object or entire regions of objects in general. Basic concepts, here with the emphasis on basic, GrundBegriffe, he's got it italicized. Basic concepts are more general representations of the most possibly encompassing regions. We're going to have examples in a minute so that you know exactly what he's talking about. Such regions are nature, history, the state, the law, humanity, animal, or whatever else. So the concept of humanity, the concept of state, the concept of nature, the concept of animal, those are basic concepts. They bring a whole region of beings before you in representation. That's what Heidegger is saying here. However, in the lecture's title, Basic Concepts, in the lecture's title, there is no talk of the basic concepts of nature, art, or other regions. So what is a basic concept that brings this region before you in representation? But Heidegger is not talking basic concepts of law, basic concepts of art, basic concepts of society. He's just talking basic concepts. So we have to make sense of that. The title does not specify anything of the kind for which the basic concepts are supposed to be such basic concepts, whether for the investigation of art history or jurisprudence, for chemistry or mechanical engineering, or for any other subject area or field of human practice. Sorry. Perhaps the unsupplemented title Basic Concepts means this, that it does not treat of particular regions of beings, nor of the corresponding sciences that investigate them individually. So let me just say that again really briefly. If we're talking about the concept of the political, like in Carl Schmitt, you have the friend-enemy distinction. The concept of the political is structured by the friend-enemy distinction. And if you're operating with the concept of the political, you can bring the political phenomena to light in representation through that concept. Likewise with the concept of art, nature, history, and so on. But Heidegger says if we're just dealing with basic concepts as such, we're not bringing a particular lens or region of beings into our representation. We're doing something else. The question is what? Since then, he continues, the lecture is listed under the rubric philosophy. Like if you were going to put this book, Basic Concepts, somewhere on a library bookshelf, you'd categorize it like they do here, philosophy. Since, however, the lecture is listed under the rubric philosophy, naturally the basic concepts, quote unquote, of philosophy are meant. But if these were meant, it would have been stated. So why isn't this book called Basic Concepts of Philosophy? Instead, the title only says basic concepts, not the basic concepts, nor the basic concepts of philosophy. According to the traditional and also correct view, philosophy indeed thinks something more general than the particular regions of nature: history, state, art, nation, living thing. So philosophy is more general than nature, history, art, nation, politics, society. It thinks at a higher level of abstraction, you might say. If we do not intend to mean the basic concepts of philosophy, then the unsupplemented title, Basic Concepts, must have something even more general in mind than what is thought in quote-unquote philosophy. This most general of all supposedly does not allow itself to be said directly. Perhaps there are no words with sufficient naming power to do so. Perhaps the appropriate words are so used up that they do not say anything anymore. Hence, such an indefinite title is perhaps well suited, for thus we do not commit ourselves to anything in advance. Heidegger is saying, if he had called this book Basic Concepts of Philosophy, it would be as though we already know what the word philosophy is trying to say. But these words have become emptied. They've become trivial. They're like calling someone a fascist today. They're words that have lost all of their substance, all of their power, and all of their magic in some way. So all of the appropriate words are so used up. So it's better that we leave it general. GrundBegriffe, basic concepts. On the other hand, this nondescript title has a peculiar decisiveness about it. You're not just leaving things open. There's a decisiveness. Evidently, nothing arbitrary or peripheral is spoken of here, but only what is necessary and pertains to the main issue. But why isn't this said directly? Well, it is. We have only to listen in the right way. By the way, this becomes a very important idea when you read Heidegger: listening in the right way, listening in a way that draws forth, that pulls what's being said forward. Okay, there are ways of listening and being in time. For those of you who know or don't know Heidegger, listening is a way of disclosing the world. The world isn't just disclosed in how we speak about it. It's disclosed in our listening as an orientation towards the world. Listening as a way of being in the world that can obscure it or that can disclose it. So, to get back to the text here, we have to listen in the right way. With the first apprehension of the title, Basic Concepts, we must immediately begin to practice what will be demanded of us from now on. What is demanded of us as we read Heidegger's lecture together? Relinquishing the customary, which is at the same time the comfortable. The comfortable and the customary we must relinquish if we are to make any progress in our understanding of Heidegger. We have to assume an attitude whose achievement requires no special knowledge in advance, neither scientific nor philosophical. Let me pause for a minute. If you say, do I have to have special philosophical knowledge in advance of reading Heidegger in order to understand what he's telling me about basic concepts? According to Heidegger, no. We have to assume an attitude whose achievement requires no special knowledge in advance, neither scientific nor philosophical. The latter, that means philosophical knowledge, may be useful for other purposes. It's not saying don't study philosophy. But here, when we're dealing with basic concepts, such knowledge would only be a hindrance. For here, only one thing is required: readiness to put the essence of man at risk in thinking that which grounds this essence, and foremost, that which grounds everything that man takes for being. Whatever grounds everything and gives ground to everything is itself the ground. Let me just pause for a minute. Let's take a step back. Heidegger's lecture is called Basic Concepts. Basic concepts of what? Law, art, politics, society? No, just basic concepts. Not even basic concepts of philosophy. So it's orienting us towards a realm where we have to give up what's customary and comfortable. And what attitude or intention should we have in order to make any progress with Heidegger in this question? To repeat, we have to assume an attitude whose achievement requires no special knowledge in advance, but only one thing: readiness to put the essence of man at risk in thinking. So what is the essence of man? What does it mean to be human? Does it mean evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology? Does it mean some other model of the interpretation? Is it body, soul, spirit? Are we, Heidegger says you have to be willing to put the essence of man at risk in thinking about the ground of human existence. Thus, the title tells us something about what is to be comprehended after all. We only have to write the word differently. So basic concepts is GrundBegriffe, and he really wants to emphasize the Grund part, which is ground, the foundation, the basis. Now the title says the ground is to be conceived, grasped, seized, indeed first reached, indeed first only anticipated. We think toward the ground of everything. Okay, you got to try to understand this orientation in thinking towards the ground. If you've presupposed something, your preposition serves as the ground, the basis or the foundation. Heidegger's always trying to get us to go further. We presuppose something, like a hypothesis or an axiom or some a priori. The question is that really the ground, or can you go a level deeper, a level deeper, a level deeper? And for Heidegger, when you go deeper, 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 ultimately you get to the question of the essence of the human being. You get to our existential openness. So you have to go deep, 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 deep. And when you go deep, you now have a new question, the question of the ground. Okay? Again, in English, it's basic concepts. In German, it's GrundBegriffe, ground concepts. So, by the way, good to be with everybody. I haven't done a live stream in so long that I just thought I'd go all in on the exposition of the first part of Heidegger's basic concepts, which I've read, and wanted to teach. So we are not, as it might appear, dealing with concepts as such, Heidegger writes, with much maligned mere concepts, from which we easily recoil, though we must assure ourselves at the same time that they're nothing concrete and lead nowhere. Let me explain this. You know the idea that something is merely conceptual. Well, it's just a concept. It has no reality, right? Like the conceptual as opposed to the real. The conceptual as abstract, okay? Heidegger says no. In this presentation of basic concepts, ground concepts, to conceptualize, to think with concepts, is to seize the ground. It's to expose ourselves to the ground of our existence. It's not distinct from real existence. It's not abstracted from real existence. It's quite the opposite. A penetration into the essence of our existence, into the essence of being as such. It's not mere concepts. Okay, so that's the end of the first section here on the elucidation of the lecture title. Those of you who have just come, thank you for being here. We're going through Heidegger's Basic Concepts lecture. So now we continue. B, the claim of the ground concepts. Ground concepts calls for us to grasp the ground, to reach the foundation. This title calls us to come to stand where a footing and a permanence are granted, where all decisions are made, but also from where all indecisiveness borrows its hiding places. Heidegger wants us to be clear about our foundation, and it's our foundation which allows us to avoid ourselves, to escape ourselves, to be authentic or inauthentic, okay, to conceal and hide, as well as to reveal and elucidate. Grasping the ground means reaching the ground of everything in an understanding that not only takes notice of something, but is, as a knowing, a standing and a stance, Heidegger writes. So it's a way of being in the world. It's a standing and a stance that is understanding and knowing about the most basic foundational realm. Knowing the ground is more originary, that is more far-reaching than common understanding, because common understanding doesn't always comprehend the ground. Not the ground like the earth outside, the existential ground, okay? The ground of being in the world. But more originary also means more decisive than every usual willing and more intimate than every familiar feeling. So here's what Heidegger is saying. Imagine three categories: understanding, willing, and feeling. I understand what you're saying. I'm going to take some action about it. I'm going to feel a certain way about it. For Heidegger, understanding, willing, and feeling as we normally take them are comparatively superficial when compared with those equivalent modes grounded in a proper understanding of human existence. So that's sort of the distinction he's making here, okay? Knowing the ground does not first need a character in order to have stability. This knowing is character itself. It's the stamp of man without which all firmness of will remains blind stubbornness, all deeds mere fleeting successes, all action a self-consuming busyness, and all experience is self-delusions. I'm going to tell you the image that most helps me understand what Heidegger's talking about. take it for what it's worth, okay? Imagine that willing, acting, feeling, knowing, understanding, all of these modes, take them as like instruments in your, like instruments, like swords, hammers, okay? Guitars, whatever, okay? Instruments that you use. But the X that's wielding the instruments, here's all the instruments, and here's the X that's using them or wielding them. Most of the time we're like, oh, okay, we do acting, feeling, willing, but we don't know this, the ground. We haven't become clear on it. So it's like, yeah, you can do all of this, but you're doing it on a basis that you haven't yet comprehended. That's distinct from like, this has opened up. The ground has opened up, and now you've situated your regular modes in the pocket, okay? In being in the world, in Heidegger's sweet spot, okay? In the realm that he's always trying to get us to come closer to and to have a breakthrough concerning. All right, so we'll continue. This is fun. Hope you're enjoying it. Ground concepts, that sounds more like a claim upon us. So regular concepts is like, I've grasped something. But basic concepts, it's like you're being grasped. The ground is, it's no longer just something you're manipulating. It's something that has a claim on you. Anyway, ground concepts, that sounds more like a claim upon us. We are exhorted to set our thinking upon the path of reflection. It's like thinking as a calling. From the time when the essential configuration of Western history, and not the mere succession of events, begins to unfold, a saying is handed down to us that goes, meleta to pan in Greek, don't worry about the pronunciation, take into care beings as a whole. That means consider that everything depends upon the whole of beings. This is going to get abstract, but I'll walk us through. Consider that everything depends upon the whole of beings, upon what addresses humanity from there. Always consider the essential first and last, and assume the attitude that matures us for such reflection. Like everything else, this attitude must be simple, and the suggestion that intimates this attitude, which is a knowing, to us must be simple as well. It suffices for this suggestion to distinguish what humanity, having come to itself, must attend to. Just want to say a couple of words of clarification on this section. Number one, there's this old Greek phrase, take into care beings as a whole. So here's one thing, my pen. Here's another thing, my book. Here's another thing, my water. But take into care beings as a whole means all, the whole, the cosmos, the pan, okay? Everything, all. In other words, what is it in us and about us that allows for the orientation, not just towards this or that, but towards the whole, the all, the everything, beings as such. So Heidegger is always going to be trying to orient us not towards this or that, but towards, like I say, the ground of all existence, or beings as a whole, and these other realms in which we operate, just to put it that way. So the difference of claims upon man. By the way, there are such beautiful passages. I'm only going to read the introduction with you, which is going to take us some time, but really amazingly moving passages in here. So bear with me. I know it's not so easy. The claim of requirements, needing. We attend either to what we need or to what we can do without. We measure what we need according to our requirements, according to desires left to themselves and their cravings, according to what we count with and count upon. Behind these desires and cravings stands the press of that unrest, for which every enough is just as soon a never enough. So here Heidegger is talking about our ordinary desire, craving, unrest, needs, wants, satisfactions. This unrest of continuously new needing, of self-increasing and expanding interests, does not originate from anything like an artificially cultivated avarice. It's not like capitalist culture has taught you always to want more. Rather, this avidity is already the result of that unrest within which the surge of mere life, of the merely living, reveals itself. To remain thrust and forced into its own craving belongs to the essence of the living, doesn't belong to the essence of capitalism. It belongs to the essence of the living. Indeed, the living, in quotation marks, which we know as plants and animals, always seems to find and maintain its fixed shape precisely in this craving. Whereas man, now Heidegger is distinguishing the living of plants and animals from man, man can expressly elevate the living and its cravings into a guiding measure and make it the principle of progress. So here you take what's natural to the living, the desire, the unrest, and the desire always for more, and man can make that into his principle. Animals don't make it into their principle. They just operate that way. But man can make it the principle of progress. If we attend only to what we need, we are yoked into the compulsive unrest of mere life. I want you to get used to kind of getting on Heidegger's wavelength here, okay? Because his formulations aren't always intuitive, but when you get them, they click. If we attend, like what are you attending to? I'm attending to what I have. I'm attending to what I don't have. I'm attending to what I want, right? Where's your attention going? If we attend only to what we need, if we put ourselves like plants and animals into this compulsion of need, we are yoked, okay, into the compulsive unrest of mere life. We become animal-like, okay? Compulsion, yoking, mere life. This form of life arouses the appearance of the moved and the self-moving, and therefore of the free, because suddenly you're chasing need after need after need after need, desire after desire after desire after desire. It looks like an active life. It looks like the life of free activity, but it only looks like it. Thus, the appearance of freedom, Heidegger continues, exists precisely where man attends only to what he needs. For man's calculating and planning move within a field of play whose limits he himself can adjust to his particular wants. You get the sense, and we're about to see, that Heidegger does not think this is the last word on freedom or need or compulsion. However, he continues, this way man is only quote unquote free, i.e. mobile, within the compulsion of his life interests. Okay, you're compelled to run from desire to desire. Suddenly maybe there is something like the madness and schizophrenia of capitalism in that. He is in certain respects unfettered within the circuit of compulsion, which determines itself from the premise that everything is a matter of utility. If you'll permit me this restatement, like he's in the market, in his thinking also, he's in the marketplace of ideas. What about the ideas that aren't in the marketplace? He doesn't know about them. He's in this hustle and bustle of chasing after desire, but that leaves something out of the picture. It puts everything under the principle of utility. Servitude, under the dominion of the constantly needed, i.e. of utility, looks like the freedom and magnificence of consumption, consuming, and its increase. Okay, that Heidegger has painted us a picture of the way things are from a certain perspective, but now we have other needs. So one set of needs gives us the compulsion of consuming, producing, and the market. But are there no other needs that exert a claim on us? So here we have the next section, the claim upon the essence of historical man. Man attends, repeating himself here, either to what he needs or to what he can do without. In this other attitude, what we can do without, he does not calculate under the compulsion of utility and from the unrest of consumption, like he did in category A, when we attend to what we need. He does not calculate at all. We're no longer talking about calculative rationality and economic man, but considers everything from a standpoint that is limited to the essential. Change of perspective, change of standpoint. This limitation is only an apparent restriction. In truth, it is a release into the expanse of those demands that befit man's essence. Another moving and beautiful account here that Heidegger just gave us. When you're constrained by the life of needs and their satisfaction, you're limited. Okay, it's like I said, you're in the marketplace of ideas, but you can't get those ideas that are up the mountain and not in the marketplace. But when you focus on what's essential, you experience a release into the expanse of those demands that befit man's essence. Really beautiful. Attending to the dispensable brings man into the simplicity and unequivocalness of an entirely different domain. Let me just pause for a minute. I've had several students do private tutoring with me before who have a background in Zen Buddhism and who want to study Heidegger with me because they say there's a nice parallelism between some of Heidegger's formulations and some of the teachings of Buddhism. I think there's a parallelism beyond that as well between Heidegger and other wisdom type teachings that liberate us from basic need, but we want to get what's specific to Heidegger. Attending to the dispensable brings man into the simplicity and unequivocalness of an entirely different domain. Here speak claims. Again, we have to listen to the claims that speak, the claims that call us forth, the claims upon the essence of the human being. Here speak claims that do not derive from his needs and do not pertain to the prospect of the well-being of the individual and the many. This domain alone, the domain of the essential, is the site in which a realm, Reich, can be founded. For here alone, in this realm of the essential, historical man can stand out into an openness, that open expanse, while subordinating everything needful and useful to himself, thereby first becoming capable of ruling in an essential sense. So you have the narrow confines of need and its satisfaction. You have the broad expanse of the essential. The broad expanse of the essential includes the narrow. The narrow excludes the broad. When you broaden out into the essential realms, you become first capable of ruling in an essential sense, Heidegger says. And you have that play on the notion of the realm, the expansive realm, but also realm like the realm that you rule over. The German is Reich. This is fun. Nice to be with you all. I'm going to continue. Man in his essence is addressed by claims that demand an answer. But these claims, which we better name exhortations, cannot be displayed like matters of fact, nor enumerated like priorities. It's easy to tell someone, this is my favorite pen. It's easy to show someone, this is my preferred type of coffee. It's not so easy to say to someone, to display, this is the claim upon the essence of my soul that's being made by my historical destiny. Okay. So these claims cannot be displayed like matters of fact, nor enumerated like priorities. Historical man, about historical we'll clarify later, but historical man must be struck by them. Okay, this isn't just some intellectual activity. You're seized, you're struck, you're called, you're compelled. Historical man must be struck by them, and for that he must allow himself to be struck in the first place. You want to prepare yourself for the lightning strike. You can't force it. You're not Zeus. You don't throw the thunderbolts, but you can prepare the lightning to strike, so to speak. He must allow himself to be struck in the first place. Perhaps the old saying, Melete topen, again, take beings as a whole into care, puts something into words that strikes historical man in his essence, such that all that is merely human is not sufficient to satisfy the claim. In other words, Heidegger is saying there are some phrases, there are some thoughts, there are some formulations from the history of philosophy when language could still speak being, when it hadn't been emptied of all of its substance and power. There are still some formulations that when we reflect on them can strike us like that lightning and not like something we can buy in the marketplace of ideas. Perhaps the attempt to think ground concepts, basic concepts, GrundBegriffe, to reach the ground of everything, comes to a knowing that cannot be added up from knowledge about quote unquote life, nor from the results of science, nor from the doctrines of a quote unquote faith. Presumably also an individual can never invent such a knowing. Again, it's not something we make. From the fortuitousness of his abilities and endowments. It's not a product of our creative genius. He can foist such knowledge neither upon himself nor upon others by decree. The relation to the essential, wherein historical man becomes free, can have its origin only within the essential itself. So we're going to continue. Readiness for the originary, the incipient, and the knowing better of historiological consciousness. Many brilliant passages to come. Let me just pause for a minute. It's been half an hour. What we're doing is going through the introduction of Martin Heidegger's lecture called Basic Concepts, which I've always wanted to teach and discuss with you because it has so many brilliant and profound formulations. Just give me a second. Let's keep going. Man, Heidegger repeats, is either ready. Oh, no, sorry. This is a new formulation. Man, by the way, listen, because this is incredible. Man is either ready for what is always original not like new, original like at the origin, the wellspring, the incipient, okay? Man is either ready for what is always original or he knows better. Knowing better, like you ever talk to your kids about something, you want to teach them something? I already know that. Do you? Because if you already, they don't, they think they do, but in knowing better and already knowing, they don't have access to the thing that you're trying to give them. So here too, Heidegger's going to say, our attitude that we know better blocks us from accessing the wellspring, the origin, the root, okay? If you prefer a religious formulation, well, let's just stick with this. Knowing better also reigns where man seems to subjugate himself, Heidegger writes, to a divine world plan. Because if you know you're part of a divine world plan, you're also, for Heidegger, blocking yourself off from questions that take you closer into the root of things, okay? This knowing better, Heidegger continues, begins in Western history with the advent of the age of historiological consciousness. The rise and universal currency, don't worry, I'll explain this, of historiological science and its varied utilization and exploitation are already the late development of man's calculating attitude towards history. This attitude begins with the ascendancy of Christianity, Heidegger says, as a principle for shaping the world, our interpretation of the world, the cosmos as imbued with meaning. Since man has become ever more ingenious and clever in the last centuries so that nothing escapes him, the relation to the essential is more and more covered over, or what is even more portentous is reckoned into the otherwise calculable. So what's the issue that Heidegger is talking about? Heidegger is trying to drive us towards basic concepts, as we've seen, towards the ground, the Grund, the underlying realm of the essential. Well, why isn't that easy to do? What is the obstacle? Well, there's several obstacles, but one obstacle is that we know better. We think we've mastered the ground in our knowledge. We already know a divine world plan. We already have a faith. We already have a science. We already have a project and a program. In other words, rather than going to the root in the direction of the origin, we're pointing in the opposite direction. We have we already know where we stand, or we think we do. And the question is, what do we do next? Heidegger says this thinking you know where you stand is an obstacle, because then you escape, the essential escapes you. And moreover, you begin to treat it like a marketplace of ideas, calculation, buying, selling, trading, manipulating, reckoning. There arises a condition in which everything is gauged according to whether it is new or old. Heidegger is always trying to teach us, don't just think about history as a timeline where you're in the now, before you is the older, okay, so that everything that's past is old. He wants you to understand that there are some things that are original rather than old. Original not in the sense of being novel, original in the sense of being at the origin, ever present, okay? It's tricky, but you get a handle on it eventually. So there arises a condition in which everything is gauged according to whether it is new or old. This is the progressivist dogmatism. In general, what counts for unlimited historiological calculation as new is not only what's unfamiliar and unprecedented, right? Something is unfamiliar, it's unprecedented, it's new, it counts as new, but also everything that continues and promotes whatever progression happens to be underway. Two ways something can be new, Heidegger just said. Something that's original and unprecedented, unfamiliar and unprecedented is regarded as new, but also something that just continues the progression, n+1, n+2, n+3. So if we're at n+3, n+4 is going to be new. It continues the progression, but it hasn't come yet. What is useless in relation to the promotion of progress counts as old, outdated, antique, etc. The old is then the antiquated, as Heidegger writes. Thus, in each epoch, historiology, which is this calculating attitude towards the passage of time, it endeavors under different catchwords to paint over the old and the bygone with the gloss of the respective present. Leo Strauss called this presentism. We're always seeing things from the point of view of the present. And the past just becomes outdated. So to justify historiological activity itself as indispensable. However, okay, so let's just take a step back. Heidegger showed us we have two claims on us, the claim of our needs and the claim of the essential. He's distinguished them. Obviously, he wants us to focus on the claim of the essential. Now he's distinguishing between two attitudes towards history. The one we saw that reckons with the past as old and with the future as new, flattens everything out on this timeline. But what about the other notion of history? So here he says the essential has its own history and is not calculable according to the ciphers new and old. Where such calculation nevertheless occurs, relation to the essential is most covered over. There, man stubbornly sets himself against the demand that he reach the essential upon the path of remembrance, and that he grasp the ground. According to the view of the merely calculating man, remembrance fixes itself to something earlier, hence older, hence old, hence antiquated, and therefore at best attainable through historiological research. Yet, the earlier, assuming it is essential, remains outside that utility to which everything new and old in the conventional sense must subject itself. So once again, two different attitudes toward time. One that calculates in terms of past, present, and future, old, antiquated, new, okay? And that uses historiological methods to study the antiquated and the old, versus the essential being outside of that calculating utilitarian mentality towards time. It's a tricky point, but it's essential for getting Heidegger's shift in perspective. Remember what he said here. Let me just remind you what's at stake in some sense. In order to understand basic concepts, in order to put us in the position to understand what Heidegger is driving at, we need readiness to put the essence of man at risk in thinking that which grounds this essence. And if something about the essence of humanity is grounded in our notion of time, Heidegger has to force us and compel us to reconsider the relation between ourselves and time, between the new and the old, the original calculation, utility, and all the rest of it. So we're going to take another step further in that direction right now. The meaning, to tell you the title of the next section, the meaning of reflection upon the inception of history. According to the historiological reckoning of time, when Heidegger uses the word historiology in the translations here, it always means this calculating attitude towards time as a flat line with past, present, and future, where you use scholarly scientific methods to study the outdated past, and you have progress in the two ways that he mentioned. According to the historiological reckoning of time, the earliest is indeed the oldest, straightforward, and in the estimation of ordinary understanding, also the most antiquated. The earliest, however, can also be the first according to rank and wealth, according to originality and the bindingness for our history, and the impending historical decisions. You're going to get what he means here in a second, because he's going to tell you. The first in this essential sense for us is the Greeks. So the Greeks are before us, in the sense of having come before us, but they're not outdated with respect to us. Heidegger later has this formulation that our job is to catch up to the Greeks. They are at our origin, they came first, and yet they're the future that we're living into. It's a different model than the flat line of past, present, and future. The first in the essential sense for us is the Greeks. We name this earliest the incipient, Anfangliche, okay? The incipient. If you follow me for my work on Dugin, you know he's got this book, Martin Heidegger, The Philosophy of Another Beginning. That beginning is the inception, inceptual, originary, all of these different synonyms you can use, okay? We name this earliest the incipient. The inception of our history is the Greeks. From it comes an exhortation in relation to which the opening of the individual and the many, the opining of the individual and the many fails to hear and misconstrues its essential power, unaware of the unique opportunity that remembrance of the inception can transport us into the essential. Remembrance of the inception, the Greek inception, can transport us into the essential realm. Can help with the transformation of the human essence, can put ourselves at risk with this possibility of a transformative reward. We can fail to hear the claim of the incipient. Like, to use religious language, you can fail to hear the voice of God. You can fail to hear the claim of destiny, right? Your listening isn't just for the cars outside your window. It's also for something more profound. So Heidegger says we can fail to hear the claim of the incipient, of the inceptual. That it comes to this seems to alter nothing in the course of our history, because for the calculating attitude, this is all mumbo jumbo anyway. Thus, the dispensability of remembering the inception is practically demonstrated. Who cares in practice whether you've heard or not heard the call of the Greeks? Like, what are you talking about? Says the man of the marketplace of ideas. Indeed, we can not only fail to hear the claim of the incipient, but even drive ourselves to the self-delusion that we do not have to listen to it in the first place since we already know about it. Okay, remember, one obstacle to a breakthrough into the realm of the essential is knowing better. Oh, we already know. No, that's a self-delusion. The whole world talks about the extraordinary cultural significance of the ancient Greeks, but no one who speaks like this, no one who speaks about the cultural significance of the ancient Greeks has the slightest knowledge that and how an inception occurs there. And now the next two passages in the book, I have every sentence underlined, okay? That's how much I liked them when I read them, so get ready. Heidegger is talking to us about the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, as the inception of our history, but people who talk about the culture of the ancient Greeks don't know what they're talking about. So let's see. Those who evince a somewhat belated enthusiasm for classical antiquity, and likewise those who encourage and promote the humanistic gymnasium, demonstrate a no more essential stance toward the incipient, despite all that, so long as their efforts are devoted only to salvaging what has been hitherto. They still operate with that flat line. They just want to go back to the past and salvage something from it. So long as they fall back upon an inherited and very questionably arranged cultural treasure, and in so doing consider themselves superior to the enthusiasts of the technological age. Oh, you enthusiasts of the technological age, we're superior because we're recovering the Greek culture. Familiarity with the ancient Greek language is certainly indispensable for the endeavor, expressly understood as a task, to awaken, develop, and secure remembrance of the incipient. So it will help to have the ability to read and study Greek. The task of those who must bring about remembrance of the incipient, Heidegger continues, cannot forego instruction in the language of ancient Greeks. And you know, he's already given us an ancient Greek passage here, Melita topen, take into consideration errantic care of beings as a whole. But one should not infer from this the erroneous opinion that those who, for whatever reasons and intentions, possess knowledge of the Greek language and pursue a humanistic schooling, would also be in possession of the ancient Greek world. Not all of those who study at a humanistic gymnasium, nor all of those who teach there, nor all of those who train these teachers at the university have already, by reason of that fact, a knowledge of the inception of the essential in Western history and that means of its future. In other words, Heidegger is saying, you might speak perfect ancient Greek. You might have read all the ancient Greek texts in the spirit of a humanistic education, but if you are still like the prisoner in Plato's cave, either he sees the shadows or there's a conversion of the soul. Same with Heidegger. Either there's a calculation with history as old cultural artifacts and relics of some possibly, utility, or there's an essential transformation of the human being where something has genuinely clicked at that ground level. How many Germans live, in quotation marks, who speak their mother tongue effortlessly and yet are unable to understand Kant's Critique of Pure Reason or one of Hölderlin's hymns? Hence, whoever has mastered the Greek language or has some acquaintance with it by accident or choice possesses not the least proof thereby that he's able to think according to the thought of a Greek thinker. By the way, in my opinion, this applies to Heidegger as well. Someone who speaks perfect German might have no access to Heidegger, and someone who speaks no German might have essential access to Heidegger, okay, on Heidegger's own terms. For it could be that he does not let himself get involved with questions in the first place, since he imagines himself, perhaps as an adherent of religious faith, to be in possession of the truth. If you think you already know, if you know better, then you don't have that drive towards the essential understanding. In such cases, which are not at all rare, passion for the classical and for humanism is even more fateful than naked ignorance of this cultural treasure, quote unquote. Love of antiquity. I just ask you to apply this to today's situation. By the way, I know a lot of people who are engaged in this type of thing. I personally respect them. I wish them success. In some cases, I'm even working with them. But consider what Heidegger is saying. Love of antiquity is then a pretext for striving to evade every decisive reflection. Readiness to confront the inception of our history thus remains more vital than any knowledge of languages. You should still learn languages, okay? But readiness to confront the inception of our history remains more vital than any knowledge of languages. This means readiness to confront the essential, which as a decision is projected ahead of this history at its inception and is its ground. Okay, so the Greek beginning of philosophy is our future, or we don't have one. Readiness to confront the inception can originate as genuine only from the necessities of the history into which we ourselves are placed. When we cast aside reflection upon the necessary, that's what I call for poetic purposes the marketplace of ideas, and insist we are in possession of the truth, all remembrance of the inception is impossible. Again, if you think you know, you've closed the door. And where such remembrance does seem to be fostered, it is only an evasion of what is worthy of question and a flight into the past. That's an important problem for Heidegger. He's got to get us around those things. He's got to get us around knowing better and around the cultural ornamentation of an interest of a humanistic kind in the ancient Greeks, which also doesn't get you anywhere essential. The measure of whether remembrance of the inception is genuine can never be determined from an interest in reviving classical antiquity. It's not like Strauss said, mere antiquarianism or something, but only from a resolve, resolve to attain an essential knowing that holds for what is to come. This knowing need not even concern the inception of our history at first. So we're not just making ourselves more culturally literate. We're digging into a deeper realm. The test, however, of whether we are merely collecting information, whether we are merely taking bygone cultural aims as a pretext for thoughtlessness, or whether we are willing to set out upon the path to reflection, this test we must put to ourselves. To this belongs inner freedom, but also the opportunity to experience, first of all, how such reflection proceeds and what it entails. This is a lecture course, okay? Heidegger's lecture course on basic concepts. Pretty amazing. It's a real privilege to be able to have it in book form. It must have been life-changing to be there in person. By the way, those of you who have just tuned in, we're reading Martin Heidegger's Basic Concepts. Not going to do the whole book, obviously, but I wanted to walk you through the introduction. So section F here, the goal of the lecture. Reflection as preparation for confronting the inception of our history. By the way, like the video and all of that if you're getting value from it. This lecture aims to provide the opportunity, Heidegger says, for such reflection or experience. So he's just said, I want you to reflect in a way that gets you into the realm of the essential, and that's what I, Heidegger, am aiming to do with this lecture. You should think according to and along with what is here thought forth. This thinking is not prescribed in any examination protocol, and fortunately cannot be so prescribed. Okay, you can't test this on an exam. Such thinking does not belong to any quote-unquote required course of study. He's telling his students, you're not just doing this for the degree. Indeed, it does not belong to any course of study at all. It also does not serve to further general education. It cannot provide entertainment for students of all departments. The thinking in which we reflect, and do nothing but reflect, does not yield any utility whatsoever. For it allows us to recognize that there's something that does not have to be effective or useful in order to be. Therefore, in this thinking, we are left to our own freedom. The possibilities for professional training, Heidegger writes, the appropriation of the skills necessary for this, instruction in areas of knowledge not directly relevant to professional training, these can always be subsequently obtained and improved upon where needed, right? You could do professional training, vocational training, learn whatever you need to learn to get a job. By contrast, the moments for essential reflection are rare and unrepeatable. That holds above all for those moments that occur once in a lifetime, that either awaken, bury, or waste one's fundamental abilities for the entire future. Ground concepts, GrundBegriffe, basic concepts. This title involves the readiness to reach the ground and not to let it go again. If this readiness is not to remain an empty curiosity, it must immediately begin practicing what it is ready for. It must begin with reflection. It is now time, Heidegger announces, to actually carry out a simple reflection in which we shall prepare to confront the inception of our history. From such remembrance of this inception, we can come to anticipate that history is moving towards decisions that will surpass everything otherwise familiar to modern man in his objectives. If this is the case, then it is necessary at this moment of the world for the Germans to know what could be demanded of them in the future, when the spirit of their fatherland must be a holy heart of nations. Okay, in the next section here, Heidegger has a recapitulation, and I do want to go over that with you. I realize we've covered 9 pages, okay? We're on page 9. Page 9 of Martin Heidegger's Basic Concepts. I know this is long, I know it's dense, so I'm going to keep going anyways. Thank you for being here. I'm glad if you're finding this to be in any way worth your while. Just give me a second. Recapitulation. See that? Recapitulation. Oh, how do I get that? Our understanding of basic concepts and our relation to them as anticipatory knowing. I'll explain that. By basic concepts, one usually understands those notions that delimit a region of objects as a whole, or according to single leading aspects. Thus, the concept of force is a basic concept of natural science. The concept of culture is a basic concept of historiology. The concept of law is a basic concept of jurisprudence. And in another way, a basic concept of natural science, right? Natural laws of science. The concept of style is a basic concept of research. I'll go there in a minute. So you see, you have these basic concepts: style, law, culture, force. Heidegger doesn't want to stop there. Keep going. Style is a basic concept of research in art history, but also in philology. Indeed, it originates from here, as it first means the mode of writing and then of saying and speaking, and finally pertains to the formal language of each work, the style of an artist, which concerns the historians of plastic art and painting, indeed all aesthetics. So understood, basic concepts assist the particular sciences with the investigation of their regions as guidelines for questioning, answering, and presenting. For example, the concept of the political. We are now taking more literally the title of this lecture, according to which the first elucidation was given. We write it accordingly, not basic concepts, but GrundBegriffe, ground concepts. The title expresses the demand to reach the ground of all that is, existential ground, fundamental realm, of what can therefore be called beings, or to anticipate it and not to let what is anticipated go again. We are thus concerned solely with attaining the ground and the relation to the ground, not with becoming acquainted with concepts as mere casings of representations. The relation to the ground is also already a knowing, even where it is a matter of essential anticipation. This term I'll have to explain in a minute. And anticipation of the essential always remains more vital than any certainty in calculating what is without essence. So we just saw you had your calculating knowing according to utility, need, desire, and consumption. But you have this other way of being, this other way of knowing, the one that is correlated with the essential realm. That's an anticipatory grasp, an anticipatory understanding. It's like being seized. But in being seized, understanding. If we are talking here about anticipation, we should not substitute a rambling feeling of incidental states of mind for the concept and its rigor. Anticipation doesn't mean like, oh, I'm anticipating a phone call. I'm waiting for something futural that I feel is about to come. Like I'm anticipating a phone call. I'm anticipating that, to receive a package today. That's the ordinary meaning. It's not Heidegger's meaning. Rather, the word anticipation should show us the way to consider that what should be brought to knowing here cannot be produced from man by his own choice. I think I saw a comment in the chat earlier also reiterating that point. Heidegger's not talking about something that we make with our creative genius. We can't force it. Anticipation means grasping something that comes upon us. It's like the lightning struck and you seized it, whose coming has long held sway, except that we overlook it. And indeed, we overlook it simply because our knowing attitude as a whole remains confused and does not recognize the simplest differences or mistakes, or ignores the import of differences that are known. So we're not usually oriented in this way towards the essential, therefore we miss it when it comes knocking. Thinking in anticipation and for anticipation is essentially more rigorous and exacting than any formal conceptual cleverness in whatever sector of the calculable. Okay, so you might think that the only way to know something clearly is to have a calculating attitude towards it. But Heidegger says, no, thinking in this essential way is more rigorous and exacting, but its rigor doesn't consist in calculation. To attain anticipatory knowing, we must practice such knowing. Okay, this is a ontological practice, existential practice. The fundamental condition for such practice is not, to repeat, a prior familiarity, for example, in the form of philosophical opinions acquired through reading. You don't have to have read the collected works of Schopenhauer to grasp the ground with Heidegger. The fundamental condition is readiness to make ourselves free for the essential. You have to have the right intention, the right attitude. Mere familiarity, whether narrow or wide, and you know people like this, they have a broad-ranging familiarity with the texts, but they're missing the essential readiness for transformation. Mere familiarity, whether narrow or wide, is capable of nothing by itself, Heidegger writes. However, that does not mean we can do without familiarity everywhere and completely. In other words, it helps maybe to have read the collected works of this person or that person, especially mature and carefully cultivated familiarity. Nor that its possession belongs to the long elapsed ideals of an intellectualistic era. Heidegger's not anti-intellectual. He doesn't say don't read books. He says don't think that reading the book is a substitute for the conversion of the soul, so to speak. Thinking that merely looks to the useful first notices gaps and mistakes only when it comes to harm, when lack of those who are capable and knowledgeable engenders the mastery of present and future tasks. Okay, this next section I have highlighted and starred and bracketed. So let's see. You see that? I must have thought it was really important the first time I read it, and now I get the pleasure of sharing it with you. The decay of knowing in the present age, the decision in favor of the useful over what we can do without. Heidegger writes now, the store of knowledge that today's youth bring with them corresponds neither to the greatness nor to the seriousness of the task. Knowing is equal to the task of the age only in one respect: its decay and its task are equally enormous. But these deficiencies will not be eliminated by suddenly beginning to learn more and faster. We must first begin again to learn learning and to know standards of measure. Cultural dissolution will not be abated by the mere introduction of newer and more convenient textbooks. The youth must not wait until more fundamental acquaintance and actual contemplation are demanded of them from above, for it is precisely the other way around. It is the prerogative of a true and wakeful youth to develop exhortations to knowledge from out of itself, and to cling to these exhortations for itself in order to construct the future. Whether one occasionally reads a book, in quotation marks, is a measure for the petite bourgeoisie. I'm sure you've seen on social media the 101 books I read this year, and you can tell they are not the kind of thing that Heidegger's talking about here. Whether one occasionally reads a book, quote unquote, is a measure for the petite bourgeoisie. It does not ask whether today's man who gets his education from charts and magazines, from radio reports and movie theaters, whether such a confused, dizzy, and purely American man still knows or can know what reading means. Nor will the degeneration of knowledge be overcome when one merely declares how much better it was in the old days. For even the former school and educational system of the last decades was already no longer able to awaken and keep awake the binding power of spirit and the bindingness of the essential, and thus no longer able to force us into reflection. Okay, you can't just, the previous university system was so much better than the current one. No, the previous one also couldn't awaken you to the essential in a binding way. In times of essential decisions, a comfortable retreat to what has been up to now helps as little as the hurried restriction to daily needs. Here only reflection saves us, and the inner choice as to whether we want to be exposed to the claim the essential makes upon us or not. You see how important that idea is for him. The decision as to whether we're capable of making decisions about ourselves comes before everything. By the way, you might have heard Heidegger once gave this phrase that The Second World War decided nothing. And people are like, oh my, that's terrible. How could Heidegger have said that? Like it was either liberalism or Nazism, You could have had such different world orders. So how could you possibly say a world war decided nothing? Heidegger is talking about essential decisions concerning man's relationship to time, man's essence, the possibility of knowledge, of being seized in the ground, those kinds of things, okay? The decision as to whether we're capable of making decisions about ourselves comes before everything. You could have two completely different political world orders that are still each in their own way doubling down on calculation, utility, need, and conquest, and that have nothing to do with this listening to the essential destiny type thing. If we are, then the decision is whether we adhere to what we need, marketplace of ideas mentality, or attend to what we can do without, the realm of the essential. If we adhere to what we need, that means, Heidegger says, addressing his students, in your present case, chasing after what's necessary for the most convenient possible arrangement of professional training. What can you put on your resume? What's going to get you that extra $1? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he's distinguishing them, okay? It's just not what he's doing, to be clear. By comparison, if we attend at the same time to what we can do without, in that sense, to the luxury, right? In some sense, a luxury is something you can do without. When, as for many of our young friends at the front, war friends, okay, war front, it comes to the most extreme, then what alone remains essential comes into view almost of itself. Okay, I retract my luxury remark because it's not appropriate here. Okay, on one sense, yes, you can do without luxuries, but on the other hand, they're still drawn from like extrapolation of the realm of need. Whereas here it's talking about something much more profound. The mark of what we decide here, imagine this is a lecture course that Heidegger gave to his students. I've got the privilege of reading it to you in this format. The mark of what we decide here does not consist in the fact that some enroll in a philosophy course and others do not. How the aforementioned decision is made, the decision about whether we're capable of making decisions about ourselves, okay? The decision about whether we're to have a future, the decision about whether we're to reach the ground, okay? Or whether we're to know better. How the aforementioned decision is made, and if it is to be made, no one can establish immediately from any kind of mark or certificate. Just because you graduated from Heidegger's course on basic concepts doesn't mean that you made this decision. Here, each person is responsible for himself, for his own delusions, and that for which he holds himself ready. Thus, one can note this reference to the crisis of knowing, grounded actually in the essence of modern history and not produced by the present emergency, with a certain satisfaction that such a thing is said. Pat yourself on the shoulders, you're talking about the crisis of the West, etc. Such a one takes his misplaced smirk over this criticism already for an accomplishment. However, if you do that, one then leaves everything the way it was, not wishing to know that what is at risk here is not the organization of the teaching system, but the most proper concern of youth, that it must take things into its own hands, that the best organization and the best curricula do not help here, because behind all of these stand decisions about what is essential. Whoever thinks he can find confirmations of his own decisionless discontent here is living in an illusion. Powerful. Okay, I want to keep reading this because I wanted to get to the end of the introduction. We're on page 12. Introduction ends on page 18. Let's keep going. The inception as a decision about what is essential in Western history, and parenthetically Heidegger adds, in modern times, unconditional will and technology. Of course, it is especially difficult for modern man to find his way into the essential, especially difficult for modern man, because in another respect, he's familiar with too much, and indeed believes he is familiar with everything. By the way, I just wrote an essay not long ago on Leo Strauss's speech called The Religious Situation of the Present, which you could probably find online. And he brings up this point, just how crucial it is. We're familiar with too much. We believe we're familiar with everything. If you think you know everything, you have no motivation to question. And if questioning is the way that you move forward, like it is for Heidegger and for Plato, for example, in the cave allegory, all you can do is double down on technological world domination without any breakthrough into the realm of the essential. For him, modern man, everything earlier is something past, by means of which he can illuminate what comes later and what pertains to him according to his needs. Here, the earlier has no power of decision. It's not like the Greek Inception. It's just that which is old, because it is no longer experienced as the incipient in history. The inception, however, can only be experienced as an inception when we ourselves think inceptively and essentially. This inception is not the past, but rather because it has decided in advance everything to come, it is constantly of the future. The Greek beginning of philosophy is our future, not our past. It projected the future into which we're living. It didn't just leave itself behind as a relic back there, according to Heidegger. We must think about the inception in this way. By inception, he now writes, we understand the originary decisions that sustain in advance what is essential in Western history. To the essential first belongs the determination of the essence of truth, in whose light Western man seeks, finds, secures, and transforms what is true. So the beginning of philosophy, the Greek beginning of philosophy, it determined the essence of truth in a way that set the playing field, so to speak, or the stage or the realm, or however you want to think about it, created the space for Western history up until now. Our understanding of what is true, of what is truth and what is true, of true things and of truth as such. The inception as the inception of history is only where there is freedom. That means where humanity decisively comports itself toward beings and their truth. Nations and races can perhaps live without history if it is a matter of mere quote-unquote life, like for animals and plants, as you recall. The mere passage of life is not yet history, not even when much happens, transpires in it. So you should know that for Heidegger, history has to do with our breakthrough into the realm of the essential. If it doesn't, then he calls it historiology, calculation. The inception of our history is the Greeks. We see here something essential that harbors still uncompleted decisions within itself. For us, this inception is not antiquity, and reflection upon it is not an activity aimed merely at salvaging a handed-down cultural treasure. We don't study ancient Greek culture in order to have something to fill our museums with. The thinker of history, Jacob Burckhardt, who happily was never a quote-unquote historian, said decades ago, occupation with antiquity is treated here and there like a poor old relative who for decency's sake one may not allow to go under. That's not the way Heidegger wants us to look at the Greek origin, like a old relative who for decency's sake one must not allow to go under. It's not a museum artifact. The equipment needed for reflection upon the inception is, for the purpose of this lecture, Heidegger's lecture, directly necessary only for the person who is attempting to provide an opportunity for reflection for the first time here. Where it is necessary for us to hear the Greek word of ancient sayings, when Heidegger is going to give us something to think about, like that meleta pan, take into care of beings as a whole. Translation can be sufficient, to be sure under the condition that the elucidation of what the word says to us, the word of the ancient Greek, the passage or phrase that he's giving us, is not lacking, that it is thought through within the horizon of our own experiencing and knowing. In other words, like you have Zen koans or something that you reflect on to have a breakthrough in the understanding of Zen. Well, Heidegger is going to give us an equivalent Greek passages that if we think through them are going to help with our reorientation. Besides, he writes, the German language is suited like no other for translating the ancient Greek word, especially when the Greek word is not merely translated into a current German usage, but when this too is renewed at the same time and becomes incipient itself. So Heidegger did that in his own German. But what actually distances modern man from the inception of his history is not only and not primarily the other language, the fact that we're speaking English and we're talking about Greek, but the changed mode of world interpretation and the basic position in the midst of beings. The modern position is the technological. How are we amidst beings? We are as technological. It is not technological because there are steam engines and the combustion motor, but rather there are these things, the steam engine and the combustion motor, because the epoch is technological. What we call modern technology, Heidegger continues, is not only a tool and a means over and against which today's man can be master or servant. Before and beyond these possible attitudes, technology is an already decided mode of world interpretation, which determines not only the means of transportation, subsistence, and recreation, but also the possibilities for any human attitude whatsoever. It preforms them according to their capacity for implementation. We have a technological orientation towards the world, not because we work with technology, but because we see all beings as that which must be implementable, effectualized, actualized, calculated, utilized. That is why technology is mastered only where it is affirmed from the outset and without reservation. That means the practical mastery of technology in its unconditional development already presupposes a metaphysical subjugation to technology. It's like you're going to use you're going to invent some new technology to overcome technology. You're just going to get trapped in more technology. Accompanying this subjugation within us is an attitude that grasps everything according to plan and calculation, and hence, as we saw earlier, not in terms of openness to the broad expanse of the essential, and does so with a view to vast time spans in order willfully and knowingly to secure what can last for the longest possible duration. So this our way of being in the world technologically amidst beings is an obstacle to, as he said, the inception of our history. It is one thing when empires endure for millennia because of their continuing stability. It is something else when world dominions are knowingly planned to last the millennia, and the assurance of their existence is undertaken by that will whose essential goal is the greatest possible duration of the greatest possible order of the largest possible masses. So some empires last a long time because they were built in a way that has them be stable. But Heidegger's saying here, think about when he's saying it, where he's saying it, that empires that are designed to last millennia because you've willed their eternal non-destruction, that's a different type of thing, okay? That's a different type of thing. This will, the will whose essential goal is the greatest possible duration of the greatest possible order of the largest possible masses, this will of the massive, has been the concealed metaphysical essence of modernity for the last 3 centuries. It appears in various predecessors and guises that are not sure of themselves and their essence. That in the 20th century, this modern metaphysical will, would attain the shape of the unconditional, Nietzsche had clearly thought through in advance. Participation in this will to man's unconditional mastery over the earth and the execution of this will harbor within themselves that subjugation to technology that does not appear as resistance and resentment. That subjection appears as will, and that means it is also effective here. So we live at a time where there's this modern attitude towards unconditional mastery over the earth, which makes Heidegger's project of a return to the inception of our essential history difficult. However, where one interprets the execution of this metaphysical will as a product of selfishness and the caprice of dictators and authoritarian states, there speak only political calculation and propaganda, I'll explain this in a second, or the metaphysical naivety of a thinking that ran aground centuries ago, or both. In other words, Heidegger's saying, you have this unconditional will to mastery over the entire earth, but if you ascribe that to the personal psychology of an authoritarian dictator, like, oh, that's just Putin who does that, that's just this other person who does that, then you fail to understand that, no, it characterizes the whole era. It characterizes the shape of the present. It's what makes modernity modernity. It's the ground. Remember, it's what's happening at the level of the essential ground. The ground has been covered over in a way that makes our orientation towards the world one of domination. It's not the caprice of this or that dictator. Political circumstances, economic circumstances, population growth, and the like can be the proximate causes and horizons for carrying out this metaphysical will of modern world history, but they're never the ground of this history, and therefore never its end. The will to preservation, and that always means the will to enhance life and its lastingness, works essentially against decline and sees deficiency and powerlessness in what lasts only a short while. On the contrary, for the inception of our history, for the Greeks, decline was unique, momentary, laudable, and great. Heidegger writes a lot about this in other places that I kind of want to mention, but I don't want to go too far off the text and I don't want to confuse you too much. But decline is it going down, and decline is it going under. Heidegger is trying to drive us to the ground. One sense of decline is things get worse, things collapse, and you have the rubble. But another sense, the essential sense of going down, going under, going through, and declining is that you're going to the origin. You're dipping your pen in the ink of the origin again. So there's something essentially great about decline in that sense. If you don't have decline in that sense, all you have is this calculating, metaphysical, utilitarian progress. You don't have the realm of the essential. So that's what he means here, where he says that For the Greeks, decline was unique, momentary, laudable, and great. Clearly, we have to distinguish here between decline while entering into something unique and perishing while clinging fast to the ordinary. Okay, that's basically what I said. He said it better. What is imperishable in the inception does not consist in the longest possible duration of its consequences, nor in the furthest possible extension and breadth of its effects, but in the rarity and singularity of each varied return of what is originary within it. My favorite image, you use what works for you, dipping your pen in the ink of the origin, writing, dipping your pen in the ink of the origin. You don't just have the accumulated texts. That becomes a tradition. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It takes you, from Heidegger's perspective, it takes you further from the origin. Then you become reliant on the tradition and you forget about accessing the root. So as he puts it here, the rarity and singularity of the varied return to what is originary. Hence, we cannot experience the inception through mere historiological familiarity with what was before. You can't just read an encyclopedia entry on the ancient Greeks and have a breakthrough to Greek as inception, but only in realizing what essentially came to be known at the inception itself. All right, remember, what's the relationship between technology and history? Historiology is a technological attitude towards the past. We talked about that a bit earlier. If you're new here and you want to watch this again, you can do so. Moving on, we're getting close to the end of the part that I wanted to cover, but let's just keep going. We're fully committed. The section of this title is Practicing the Relation to What is Thought-Worthy by Considering the Ground. If now and then we hear a brief saying of the incipient Greek thinkers of the West, the important thing at first is that we hear and think about the fact that everything has to do with us. It has to hit you. It has to resonate with you. You have to appropriate it. You have to understand that across this vast expanse of millennia, the Greek is speaking to you. In order to consider this, we must actually become practiced in thinking. The worst way to practice thinking, however, would be an academic course in logic. The usual orthodox logic thinks, at best if it thinks at all, about thinking. But we do not learn to think originarily when someone shows us how to think in an inferior and long since impossible manner about thinking. Rather, we learn to think only, and I'm going to say something about this too, when we try to attain an essential and genuine relation to what above all else is thought worthy. How do you learn to think? Do you learn to think by learning the rules of thinking, by learning logic, deduction, reduction to absurdity, fallacies? No, for Heidegger. You learn to think by orienting your thought towards what is most worthy of thought, to what above all else is thought-worthy. And what is thought-worthy is certainly not thinking, but what challenges thinking, what places thinking in its service, and thus bestows rank and value upon it. Okay, that which is to be thought, that which is worthy of our thought, that which calls our thought forward, which gives it rank and value. We don't learn this essential thinking by means of any logic. By the way, another amazing lecture course by Heidegger is called Logic, the Essence of Truth. Ground concepts, basic concepts, GrundBegriffe, means to say grasping the ground of everything, and that means to attain a relation to the ground of everything. What ground means here must be clarified step by step, along with what the relation to the ground consists in, to what extent and knowing belongs to this relation. So he just said, we want to learn to think. We don't learn to think by thinking about the rules of thinking, but by orienting ourselves towards what's most thought-worthy. What's most thought-worthy in this context? The ground, Grund, the basis. Thus, it would be premature if we wanted to equate ground with the cause of everything, because we don't know yet. The concept of cause and the concept of ground, we don't know that they're equivalent. It would be premature if we wanted to equate ground with cause of everything and wanted furthermore to interpret this cause as a first cause in the sense of a creator according to the Bible and Christian dogma. It would be premature, he didn't say this wrong, right? It would be premature to treat the ground in those terms. It would also be premature to believe that with these concepts, it's solely a matter of representing the ground, representational thinking. It is rather a question of extending our thinking toward the manner in which the ground includes us in its essence, not the manner in which we take the ground to be merely an object, like my pen or cup, and use it for an explanation of the world. Once again, the reorientation here, the conversion of the soul from seeing the shadows on the wall to beginning your ascent, the Heideggerian version of that, from you being the grasper, the conceptualizer, the genius, the origin, to you being included in, grasped by, seized by, and under the sway of the ground. However, the essence of the ground, but also the concepts, okay, the two notions of GrundBegriffe, ground concept, i.e. the relation to the ground, might explain and confirm themselves to us. However that happens, one thing remains clear in advance. No individual with a worked out doctrine and viewpoint can arbitrarily at any particular time expound something and decide it by decree. It is also easy to see that an examination of previous viewpoints and doctrines concerning the ground and the relation to the ground at best provides a historiological familiarity. Right, again, an encyclopedia entry on basic concepts isn't going to give you a breakthrough to the realm of basic concepts. The relation through which we ourselves come into proximity with what strikes us essentially and makes a claim upon us. Prepare yourself for the lightning strike. That's the name of the game. We do not wish to discuss doctrines. Rather, we want to become aware of the essential in which we stand, or within which we are perhaps still driven to and fro without a footing and without understanding. Oh, I'm going to keep going. We're almost done. Not that I'm in a rush. This is great, but I know it's long and obscure. Is everybody enjoying this? It's Heidegger. All credit where it's due. The essential admittance of historical man, we're still on, into the inception, into the essence of ground. Okay, how do you get there? What do you do? What's the access? Heidegger has given us the problem. He's said something about it. What we do want to do, what we don't want to do. What's next? We must listen our way into that place where we ourselves belong. I love that kind of formulation. We must listen our way into that place where we ourselves belong. With this, reflection leads us through the question as to whether we still belong anywhere at all. Even to merely anticipate where we could belong, it is necessary to experience ourselves. This means ourselves, not according to a historiologically given condition, ourselves not according to a currently existing situation, ourselves not according to the individually occurring specimens of humanity, but ourselves in respect to what determines us and is other than us, which nevertheless governs our essence. Okay? Who we are for Heidegger is a function of the Greek beginning of philosophy in a way that we must experience if we just no longer want to be free-floating or in a world where the walls are closing in on us. We call this arbitrarily at first the inception of our history. By this, we do not mean history as a series of events in terms of a causal nexus, of which what occurs later and today is an effect. Remember, not the billiard ball model of history, this hit that, hit that, hit that, hit that. Now we're just going to play it forward, play it backward, not just this series of events in terms of a causal nexus. History means, Heidegger clarifies, again, at first appearance arbitrarily, he realizes this isn't going to make perfect sense right away, the happening, Ereignis, other places translated event, of a decision about the essence of truth. The manner in which the whole of beings is revealed, in which man is allowed to stand in the midst of this revelation, is grounded and transformed in such a decision. So for Heidegger, we live our lives in the context of a decision that has been made as to the nature of beings as a whole. A decision that has been made as to the nature of the essence of truth. The realm of an original decision about what is truth, what is being, what is the human being. That's the realm of essential decision. And that decision is a happening, an Ereignis, an event. Okay? History means the Ereignis of a decision about the essence of truth. The manner in which the whole of beings is revealed, in which man is allowed to stand in the midst of this revelation, to repeat, is grounded and transformed in such a decision. Such a happening, Ereignis, is exceptional. And this exceptional history is so simple when it happens and prepares itself that man at first and for a long time thereafter fails to see it and fails to recognize it. It's not like it's snowing or it's raining outside. It's not so easy to see. This is because his vision is confused by habituation to the multiplicity of the ordinary. What do you ordinarily do? Eat, drink, work, sleep, this, that, the other thing. You take care of the beings that are in and around your world. You don't take care of the essential decisions about the essence of being as such. The simple is the most difficult and can be experienced after long endeavor, only experienced after long endeavor. Remembrance of the inception of our history is the awakening of knowing about the decision that even now and in the future determines Western humanity. To be the West is to be exposed to the decision about the truth of the ancient Greek inception. Remembrance of the inception is therefore not a flight into the past, not again this antiquarianism, but readiness for what is to come. In such remembrance, we ourselves stand everywhere at risk, for in remembrance we always remain unimportant as extant human specimens and currently existing human groups. Historical man matters only when and insofar as he stands in relation to the essence of history, and hears a claim from this essence according to which what matters is distinguished from what doesn't matter, the groundless. Above all, and we're getting close to the end of the introduction, which is where I'm going to stop. Above all, we ourselves stand at risk. And that means the truth that determines us and has perhaps long since become unrecognizable. Above all, we ourselves stand at risk, and therefore also the truth that determines us and has perhaps long since become unrecognizable. So for example, the truth that the human being is material. Or, okay, just to give you a simple example, that's what Heidegger means by determined. Determined like given the shape, given the definition of. Human being is currently treated as defined in certain essential ways, but we've forgotten the decisions that brought us there. We do not find ourselves by becoming selfish and following the impulse of those interests that merely drive us along. So this is nice. Like, how do you find yourself? Well, Heidegger says you don't find yourself by looking in your selfish interests. We are rather most likely to find ourselves when we succeed in looking away from what is self-seeking and peculiar to ourselves and bring into relief something long overlooked. There's something hidden. There's that, remember, the broadening out into the realm of the essential. You won't find yourself, in this rough analogy, in the marketplace of ideas. You have to get outside the marketplace to find yourself. Again, we are most likely to find ourselves, Bruce, thank you. We are most likely to find ourselves when we succeed in looking away from what is self-seeking and peculiar to ourselves and bring into relief something long overlooked. Let us allow ourselves then to be struck by the incipient and come to hear an ancient saying. Remember, like a Zen koan, kind of, but with this different intention. Simply said, now on the last page of the introduction where I'll stop, simply said, ground concepts, GrundBegriffe, means for us here grasping the ground of beings as a whole. To grasp, however, does not mean that we merely permit ourselves to represent the ground. It's not representational thinking where our thought is here and the thing we're thinking is here. When we have grasped something, we also say something has opened up to us. That means for the most part that we have been transported into what has opened up and remain determined by it from now on. You see the difference? Representational thinking, I'm over here and I'm representing to myself whatever I'm thinking. Ground, object, cup, pencil, but I remain here unaffected. All I have is this screen where I'm projecting, representing. That's not what Heidegger's talking about. The grasping, the grasping part of the ground concept. Concept has the same root here as grasp, begreifen. It is an opening up. Okay, that's absolutely crucial just to get that shift in perspective of Heidegger. This means for the most part that we've been transported into what has opened up and remain determined by it from now on. Okay. Thus, to grasp the ground means, above all, that the essence of the ground embraces us into itself and that it speaks to us in our knowing about it. Grasping announces itself to us as being embraced into the essence of the ground. Okay, this being embraced into does not consist exclusively in a knowing. It doesn't consist exclusively in a knowing. It's not just an intellectual act. It's not just knowledge. Okay, it's a being embraced into that is the whole person, feeling, mood, willing, emotion. Okay, standing, who you are. It's a whole existential conversion. This being embraced into does not consist exclusively in a knowing, although it has the essential characteristic of a knowing. This knowing, however, can remain concealed from itself for a long time and can block the way to itself. Nevertheless, even so veiled, this knowing permeates the history of mankind and is the bedrock in the mountain range of history. Last couple sentences here. Man does not occasion this knowing of the ground through mere flashes of insight, nor can he force it through the art of mere cleverness. Remember, not even if you really know your German, not even if you really know your Greek, not even if you've read the collected works of Schopenhauer. What he can do, and constantly does in one way or another, is only to remain within this knowing or to forget it, to become aware of it, remembrance, or evade it. That's the end of the introduction. Here I'm going to stop, but just to let you know what you would have if you were to read forward. Part 1, considering the saying, that's the saying Meleta Topan, the difference between beings and being, getting into the ontological difference there. This was Martin Heidegger's basic concepts. I've always wanted to share with you what we just read together, that introduction. I hope that you found the exposition there helpful, especially like Bruce. Amazing to see that you've read this work 4 times. I hope that this introduction did help you to get some extra additional footing into it. You can tell it's time for me to stop because the printer's working. It means my wife is printing something. Despite the noise, it's all right. Thank you everybody for being here. Let me just take a minute longer and, go over to the chat, which should be nice. Can I make it look like it's supposed to look? Can I make it look like it's supposed to look? How about, wait. I'm still pretty clumsy when it comes to this, but whatever. Okay. No, I want to see your names on screen. That'd be nice too. And the text. That's better, right? Okay, there we go. So I know there's been a lot in the chat. I really appreciate that. I didn't want to get too sidetracked. I wanted to make sure that we got through the whole introduction. Now it's on video, so you can, stop it and watch it again as need be. Thank you everybody for your comments. Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. If you want more Heidegger, I have courses on Heidegger at my school. If you liked this video and you'd send it to people, that would also be nice and helpful. William, thank you for your super chat as well. Guys, very, very much appreciated. It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to spend my time with you like this. So thank you very, very much. What can I tell you? If that resonated, that gives you a taste of Heidegger. In my view, a lot of his writing has that spirit to it, okay? That he's not just giving you an accumulation of concepts. He wants to hold your hand as you aim at a breakthrough towards the ground of our existence. That's true of being in time, true of contributions to philosophy of the event. It's the most important thing to understand about Heidegger because it's the shift kind of in orientation that helps the other pieces fall into place. So once again, really, really grateful for your time for Heidegger, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let's stop it there. See you in the next video.